There is someone right now in this very moment who has thought about you today. Not yesterday, not last week, today. They thought about you before they even reached for their phone this morning, before the world asked for their attention, before the noise of life rushed in and filled every corner of their waking hours. They thought about you in that quiet, still sacred sliver of awareness that lives between sleep and waking. That thin space where the truth of what we actually feel floats to the surface before we have had a chance to push it back down. Someone is thinking about you every single day, but they will never reach out. And if you are hearing this right now, perhaps you already know exactly who that person is. Perhaps in the deepest room of your own heart, you are that person for someone else. Stay with this, because what we are about to explore together is not just a story about two people separated by silence. It is a story about the unseen structure of human connection. The bridges we build in our minds but never finish building in real life. It is a story about the war that rages between what we feel and what we allow ourselves to show. And most deeply, it is a story about you, about what it means to be truly seen, truly known, and yet somehow still alone inside the echo of someone else's unspoken love. I once wrote that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are changed. But what happens when the reaction occurs in only one direction? What happens when one person is changed and the other never even knows the spark was there? What happens in the vast aching silence between two people who have changed each other forever, but who stand now on opposite ends of a canyon neither has the courage to cross? This is where we are going. This is the territory of the soul. We are about to walk together with honesty, with depth, and with the kind of fearless caring that does not look away from the truth of human softness. Think about the last time you heard a song that reminded you of someone so sharply it physically hurt. Think about the way the mind does this. How it holds a person in its structure like a load-bearing wall, unseen but essential, impossible to remove without the whole building shifting. That song found you because something in your nervous system is still tuned to the frequency of that person. You did not choose it. You did not sit down one day and decide to keep them close. The mind did it on its own, because that is what the mind does with the people who have mattered most. It stores them not in memory but in the body itself, in the catch of the breath, in the uncontrolled smile, in the strange sadness that descends on a perfectly good afternoon for no clear reason whatsoever. You do not think of them, you feel them. That is an entirely different thing. And somewhere across a city, across a country, across the strange and ruling distance of chosen silence, someone is having that same experience with you. They are driving home from work, and your face appears behind their eyes, like a picture on a screen they cannot turn off. They are sitting across from someone at dinner and thinking how you would have laughed at something just said. They are lying in bed in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and the word that crosses their mind without asking is your name. Your name. Not spoken, not typed into a message, just held there in the quiet theater of their deepest self, like a candle that refuses to go out, no matter how many times the wind tries to claim it. Why will they not reach out? This is the question that burns. This is the question that keeps people awake at 3 a.m, scrolling through an old conversation that ended too soon, rereading messages that once felt electric and now feel like old objects from a life that belongs to someone else. Why does the person who thinks of you every day stay silent? The answer is not simple. It is layered in the way that all deeply human things are layered, like rock layers, each level revealing something older, something more basic, something that goes all the way down to the bottom of who this person is and what they believe they deserve. Fear is the first layer, and it is always the most easy to see. Fear of rejection. Fear of misreading a connection that may have meant more to one person than to the other. Fear of being the one who reaches out first and discovers in that terrible moment of open softness that the other person has moved on, that they are happy without you, that the weight you have been carrying was not shared. This fear is not weakness. Do not mistake it for weakness. It is in fact the shadow side of love. The proof that something real was there, something worth protecting, something so precious that the thought of having it confirmed as gone is more terrifying than the uncertainty of not knowing. And so the person sits in their silence, not because they do not care, but because they care so much that reaching out and being met with coldness feels like a kind of death they are not ready to survive. But there is a second layer beneath the fear, and this one is harder to name because it requires a deeper kind of honesty. It is shame. Not the dramatic, loud shame of having done something terrible, but the quiet, eating, everyday shame of feeling like too much, of having once shown your fullness to another person and sensed, rightly or wrongly, that it was too much to take, of having loved with a strong force that the other person was not able to match, not because you were wrong to love that way, but because the timing, the circumstance, the chapter of both of your lives was out of place. This shame whispers to the person who thinks of you every day that they have already shown too much, that to reach out again would be to confirm what they already suspect about themselves, that they love too hard, feel too deeply, need too openly, and that this is somehow a flaw rather than a gift. And so they go quiet. They protect you from themselves. They call it consideration, but I would call it by its true name, the shadow. The part of the self that has been told in ways large and small that it does not fit. There is something deeply important here that you must not miss. The person who thinks of you but will not reach out is not simply being passive. They are making an active, daily, tiring choice. Every morning, they wake up with you somewhere in their awareness, and every morning they choose, knowingly or not, to leave that thought inside them rather than send it outward. Do you understand what that requires? That is not indifference. Not caring would be so much easier. Not caring would set them free. What they are doing instead is keeping a connection without contact, love without showing it, presence without arriving. They have built a private altar to the idea of you, and they tend it with a devotion that no one else will ever see. This is not nothing. This is in fact one of the most quietly heartbreaking things a human being can do. Old philosophers believed that love is not a feeling but an activity, something we do, something we practice, something we choose to extend outward into the world toward another person. But what do we call the love that is practiced entirely in private? What do we call the devotion that never leaves the inside of a single life? It exists at the edge of two of the most deep human experiences, love and grief, because it contains parts of both. It is the love of presence and the grief of absence held together forever by a person who has decided, for reasons that may be heartbreaking or complicated or even misguided, that to keep this love alive privately is the only safe way to hold it. You need to know something, whether you are the person being thought of or whether you are the person doing the thinking. You need to know that this experience is not a failure. It does not mean that the connection was not real. It does not mean that what happened between two people was not important. In fact, there is an argument, a deep thinking, uncomfortable argument, that the connections which leave the deepest marks are not always the ones that are fully shown. Sometimes the most changing relationship you will ever have is the one that ended before it was finished. The one that got cut off mid-sentence, like a novel missing its final chapter, like a piece of music that stops before the ending. That unfinished quality is not a defect in the story. It is what keeps the story alive inside you, turning, growing, teaching you things about yourself that the completed version never could. Think about who you were before that person entered your life. Really think about the version of you that existed before you knew them. The preferences, the beliefs, the borders of what you thought you were able to feel. And then think about who you became in their presence, or even just in the wake of their absence. How the things that once seemed important began to feel empty. How the things you had never noticed before suddenly became bright. How your standard for what a conversation could be, what closeness could feel like, what it meant to be truly understood by another person, how all of that shifted permanently, irreversibly because of them. They did that. The person who is thinking about you every day, they did something to the landscape of your inner life that cannot be undone. And you did the same to them. That is the exchange that happened between you. That is what neither of you has been able to leave behind. And here is where it becomes truly hard. Because there are people hearing this right now who are carrying this weight with a particular kind of pain. The pain of having been the one who was thought of, but never knew it until too late. Until the relationship ended, or the person moved away, or the years passed, or someone sat them down and told them what they had never been told directly. And the revealing is devastating in a very specific way, because it goes back and rewrites a period of your life. It makes you go back and relive moments that you thought you understood, and see them suddenly in a completely different light. It makes you ask the question that is perhaps the most quietly cruel question in the entire human experience. What if I had known? What if you had known back then that someone was carrying you in their heart every day? Would you have reached out? Would you have said the thing you held back? Would you have walked toward rather than away? This question is not useful in the literal sense. We cannot go back. We cannot re-enter the past. We cannot rewrite what has already been written. But it is deeply useful in another sense, because it reveals something basic about what you value, about what kind of person you want to be, about the specific regret that you most want to avoid in the chapters that are still ahead of you. The question, what if I had known, is not about the past at all. It is about the present. It is about right now. It is asking, what do you know right now that you are not acting on? Because here is the truth that lives at the center of all of this. Right now in this moment, you probably know someone who needs to hear from you. You probably have a name sitting in the back of your mind, a face that surfaces when you are not guarding your thoughts carefully enough. A person about whom you have told yourself one of the following stories. It has been too long. They have moved on. It would be awkward. I do not want to seem desperate. They probably do not think about me the way I think about them. You have told yourself one of these stories so many times that it has begun to feel like a fact rather than what it actually is. A choice. A daily changeable choice. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that might shift something in you if you let it, is that somewhere out there another person is telling themselves the same story about you. There are two people right now somewhere in the world who are both thinking of each other every day, who both believe the other person has forgotten them, who both sit in a silence born not of not caring, but of a mutual heartbreaking, completely unnecessary fear. Two people orbiting the same unspoken truth, each convinced they are the only one who still feels the pull of it. This is what silence does. This is the structure of unexpressed love. It creates a mirror illusion, where both people stand at their respective windows, unable to see that on the other side of the glass, another person is standing at exactly the same window looking back. I spoke at length about what I called the persona, the mask we wear for the world, the carefully built version of ourselves that we present to others in order to be acceptable, safe, easy to read. And I distinguish this from the soul, the deep self, the part of us that knows things we are not ready to say out loud. The person who thinks of you every day is living entirely in the territory of the soul when it comes to you. In every other area of their life, they are wearing the persona. They are functional, professional, perhaps even cheerful, certainly managing. But in that private inner space, in those unguarded moments between waking and sleeping, between one task and the next, they are fully nakedly themselves. And in those moments, you are there. Not a fantasy version of you, not a perfect picture. You with your particular laugh and your specific way of phrasing things, and the memories attached to your name. The real you held carefully privately without your knowledge or permission, in the most honest part of another human being's life. Does this change how you see yourself? It should, because one of the great system failures of the way most people move through the world is the belief that they are more forgettable than they actually are. People routinely underestimate the impact they have on others. They have conversations that feel unremarkable to them, but that another person turns over in their mind for months. They make gestures that feel small from the inside, but that mean everything to the person on the receiving end. They exist in a room, and their presence, the specific unique quality of their particular energy, changes the temperature of that room in ways they will never know. You have done this more times than you can count, and in more lives than you are aware of. You have walked through the world leaving marks on people who will carry the shape of you long after you have moved on and forgotten the interaction entirely. This is not about ego. This is not a call to self-love or self-praise. It is something far more humble and far more important. It is an invitation to take yourself seriously as a force in the lives of others, to understand that your presence matters, that your words have weight, that the quality of your attention, when you give it fully to another person, is one of the most deep gifts that one human being can offer another. And if you can hold that truth, if you can let it land, not in your ego, but in your sense of responsibility, then you begin to understand why the person who thinks of you every day feels what they feel with such stubborn force. You gave them something real, something that cannot be copied, something that they have searched for in the faces of other people and found only near matches of, close but not quite. Like a song performed by a different singer who gets every note right, but somehow misses the soul of the original. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being deeply known by someone who is no longer present in your life. It is not the loneliness of being alone. It is something more confusing and more painful than that. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people who know the surface of you, the public version, the chosen self, while the one person who had access to the unedited inside has become unreachable. This is the loneliness that cannot be solved by company, because more people is not the answer when the problem is not absence of people, but absence of the specific person who once made you feel less alone inside your own deepness. The person who thinks of you every day knows this loneliness closely. They live in it, and yet they will not reach out, because in some deep and maybe unreasonable way, the thought of you, even unreachable, even silent, is more sustaining than the prospect of replacing you with someone easier to hold. This speaks to something that the behavioral sciences have been circling for decades, and that the poets have known forever. Human beings do not form attachments to people so much as they form attachments to the version of themselves they become in the presence of those people. When you lose someone important, you do not just lose the relationship, you lose a self. You lose the particular form of who you were when you were with them, lighter, or more serious, or funnier, or braver, or more tender than you typically allow yourself to be. You lose the mirror they held up for you. And the grief that follows is not only for them, but for that version of you that only existed in their company. The person who cannot stop thinking of you is grieving this quietly daily, without drama or announcement. They are mourning a self they cannot get back without you. And yet, and this is perhaps the most important turn in everything we have been exploring, grief of this kind, when it is faced with honestly rather than avoided, is one of the most powerful sparks for change that a human life can contain. The old poets understood this. The wise ones, who knew something about the relationship between longing and growth, wrote of how the reed flute cries for the reed bed it was separated from, and how that very cry, that very expression of separation, is what makes it capable of music. The wound is not the end of the story. The wound is where the story truly begins. The person who has loved you and lost you and carried you in silence is not simply a person in pain. They are a person being refined by that pain, being deepened by it, being made slowly and without their full knowing into a more complex, more caring, more fully human version of themselves. This does not mean the pain is good in a simple or comfortable sense. It is not. Loss is not beautiful when you are inside it. Longing is not poetic when it wakes you at 4 a.m. with a grief so specific and so physical that you have to press your hand to your own chest just to remind yourself that you are still here. These things are hard. These things are real, but they are not meaningless, and they do not have to be permanent in the way they are currently being held. Because here is what the deepest psychological traditions, from the old healers to the quiet thinkers, all agree on, across centuries and cultures, and entirely different frameworks for understanding the human mind. The experience of absence, of longing, of loving what you cannot hold, points towards something inside you that needs attention, not the other person, you. It is directing your gaze inward. It is asking you a question that only you can answer, in the silence of your own honest reckoning with yourself. The question is not, why will they not come back? The question is, what does the strength of this feeling reveal about what you actually need? What does the specific nature of your longing for this person tell you about the parts of yourself that have gone unmet, undeveloped, uncelebrated because you did not love them in a vacuum? You love them because something in them matched something in you, a value, a way of seeing, a capacity for depth or play or tenderness that you recognized as your own. And if you have been telling yourself that that thing only exists in them, that it can only be reached through them, then here is the gently devastating truth. You have been looking in the wrong direction. The quality that drew you to them, the thing that their presence unlocked in you, that is yours. It has always been yours. They did not create it. They simply created the conditions in which you were finally willing to let it breathe. So the work, the real practical sacred work that lies on the other side of all this longing, is to identify what those conditions were and to begin purposely growing them in your own life, in your own inner world, with your own steady hands. Not to replace the person, not to diminish what you shared, but to honor it by refusing to let the lessons die with the relationship. To take what they awakened in you and carry it forward, not as a memorial to them, but as a living, growing part of who you are becoming. And what of the person who is thinking of you right now? What is their work? Their work is harder in some ways, because it requires a kind of courage that has nothing to do with big gestures or grand declarations. It requires the small, terrifying courage of honesty, the willingness to look at the story they have been telling themselves. It is too late. They have moved on. I do not deserve to reopen this. And ask with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, is this story actually true? Or is it a story I have chosen because it protects me from the risk of reaching out and being received poorly? Because here is what almost no one tells you. The risk of reaching out is almost never as devastating as the imagination makes it seem. The awkwardness, if it comes, is survivable. The rejection, if it comes, is survivable. What is far less survivable over the long run is the gathered weight of all the things you meant to say and never said, all the love you felt and never expressed, all the connections you could have chosen to tend and instead let drift into silence out of a fear that turned out to be far larger in your mind than in reality. There is a moment, and perhaps you have felt it, when you are with someone and you both know something is true and neither of you says it, and the moment passes and you spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if one of you had been just a little braver, just a little more willing to be seen, just a little less afraid of your own softness. Those moments do not announce themselves in advance. They come quietly dressed as ordinary conversation, ordinary afternoon, ordinary Wednesday in the middle of an ordinary month, and they pass. They pass so quickly, and what you are left with in their wake is the silence of what was not said, which is somehow louder than anything that was. This is why we are here. This is what this entire exploration has been moving toward. Slowly, layer by layer, like someone carefully removing the wrapping from something very fragile. Because if you take only one thing from all of this, one insight, one shift, one ember of changed perspective, let it be this: the love that is not expressed is not love that is safely kept. It is love that is slowly and quietly consumed. It disappears not with a dramatic ending, but with a gradual fading like a photograph left in the sun. The colors bleaching gently until the image is still there, but the vividness is gone. Expression is not the cheapening of love. Expression is the act that keeps love alive. The reaching out, the risking, the willingness to say, I have been thinking about you. This is not weakness. This is one of the bravest and most fully human things a person can do. And here, right here, in this final space of reflection, is where you must sit with yourself for a moment, without the noise. Because there is someone in your life, or someone who used to be in your life, about whom you have been carrying something unspoken, something that deserves to be expressed. Not because the outcome is guaranteed, not because the relationship will be restored, not because it will fix everything or return what was lost, but because you deserve to live without that particular weight. Because the version of you that has held this thing in silence for so long has been spending enormous energy on the act of holding it in. And what would happen? Who would you become? How much lighter would you move through the world if you set that weight down? Not by abandoning it, but by giving it the voice it has been asking for. Some of you will reach out. Some of you will send the message, make the call, write the letter that has been composing itself in the back of your mind for months, or